Near-death experiences have fascinated people for centuries, offering glimpses into what lies beyond. But what if someone saw more than just the afterlife? What if they witnessed a future event, one that marks the final battle before Christ's return? That's exactly what happened to Robbie Carter. After a sudden medical emergency, he found himself in a realm beyond time, watching an apocalyptic vision unfold before his eyes. What he saw was terrifying yet undeniable, a message for those willing to listen. Robbie's experience began on what seemed like an ordinary day. He had no reason to suspect that within moments, his life would change forever. A sudden, intense pain shot through his chest, and before he could even process what was happening, his vision blurred, and everything went black. Doctors later confirmed that he had suffered cardiac arrest, but at that moment, Robbie felt himself floating above his own body, watching as medical personnel worked frantically to revive him. As he drifted further from the physical world, he felt an overwhelming sense of peace. It was as if he had left all earthly concerns behind. But this peace was short-lived. Almost instantly, the atmosphere changed, and he was pulled into a dark expanse. There was no floor, no sky, just an empty void. Then, without warning, the scene transformed. He found himself standing on what appeared to be a great battlefield, stretching beyond the horizon. He could hear voices, some crying out in anguish, others calling upon the name of the Lord. But the most chilling sound of all was a deep, unrelenting silence from the opposing side. They stood in perfect formation, as if waiting for a signal to advance. Despite the absence of weapons, their very presence exuded hostility. It was then that Robbie realized this was no ordinary battle, this was a war between forces greater than mankind. Before he could even comprehend what was happening, a voice echoed through the sky, speaking words that sent shivers through his soul: "The time has come." Instantly, the battlefield erupted into chaos. Robbie saw two distinct forces taking their places. On one side stood those who remained faithful to Christ. Their presence was unlike anything he had ever seen. They did not wear traditional armor, yet they radiated a divine light, as if an unseen power shielded them. Some appeared to be warriors, standing firm with unshakable confidence. Others were ordinary people, men, women, and even children, yet their faith burned so brightly that it formed a protective barrier around them. On the other side was a dark, menacing force. Their forms were obscured by shadows, and their eyes glowed with an eerie red light. Unlike the faithful, they did not seem human. Their movements were calculated, unnatural. These were not mere soldiers, these were entities that thrived on fear and deception. They did not speak, but Robbie could sense their intentions: destruction, chaos, and the complete erasure of truth. As the armies positioned themselves, a massive figure stepped forward from the enemy ranks. His presence alone sent a wave of dread through the battlefield. He was not just a leader, he was a deceiver, a being who had gained control over countless souls through manipulation and false promises. His voice was smooth, persuasive, yet laced with venom. "You have already lost," he said, a sinister smile creeping across his face. Yet, the faithful did not waver. Instead, a single voice rose among them, filled with unwavering conviction: "We do not fight with weapons of this world, but with the power of truth." At that moment, Robbie realized that this war was not about strength or numbers. It was about faith, the ultimate test of belief in the face of darkness. In a sudden shift, Robbie's vision changed. He was no longer on the battlefield but standing amidst a great city. Skyscrapers loomed above, massive crowds gathered in every direction, and in the center of it all stood a man unlike any other. He was charismatic, commanding, and surrounded by an aura of power. People hung on to his every word as he spoke of unity, peace, and progress. Yet, Robbie felt a deep unease. Something about this figure was wrong. As he observed, it became clear that this man was no ordinary leader. He was the deceiver from the battlefield, now wearing the face of salvation. He promised to end wars, erase poverty, and bring the world together under one banner. Millions followed him without question, accepting his words as truth. But Robbie could see what others could not. Behind his polished speeches and grand gestures, there was a hidden agenda, one that sought control, not unity. The faithful were slowly being pushed to the margins. Laws were passed restricting their beliefs, forcing them to choose between their faith and their place in society. Those who resisted were branded as enemies, accused of spreading division and hate. Robbie watched as churches were emptied, replaced with massive halls where people worshipped the image of the false savior. It was then that he understood, this was the great deception spoken of in prophecy. This leader was not here to save, he was here to lead people away from the truth. The final battle was not just about swords and shields, it was a war of the mind, a war of the soul. Above the city, the sky began to change. The sun dimmed, an unnatural darkness spreading across the land. The stars seemed to flicker and fall, like embers from a dying fire. Then, the moon turned a deep, blood red. Gasps of fear echoed through the streets as people pointed to the sky. These were the signs that had been foretold, the warnings that the final battle was near. Robbie looked around and saw two kinds of reactions. Some fell to their knees, crying out for mercy, realizing too late that they had followed the wrong path. Others remained defiant, scoffing at the signs, insisting that science could explain everything. But no explanation came. The world was changing, and no one could deny it any longer. He saw a massive earthquake shake the ground, splitting cities apart. The oceans roared, consuming coastlines in a matter of minutes. The deception had blinded many, but now, the truth was undeniable. The heavens were declaring what had already been decided, the final battle was here. As Robbie looked up, he saw figures appearing in the sky. At first, they were distant, but then they became clearer. These were not mere visions, they were angels, standing in formation, watching as the final moments unfolded. The moment everything had been leading to had arrived. The sky split open, revealing a brilliance unlike anything Robbie had ever seen. A figure descended, radiating light so powerful that even the forces of darkness recoiled in terror. There was no mistaking it, this was Christ, returning in all his glory. At his presence, the battlefield froze. The deceiver, once so confident, now trembled. The forces of darkness fell into chaos, their power crumbling before the overwhelming light. The faithful stood in awe, their hearts filled with both relief and reverence. Then, a voice rang out, strong, unshaken, "It is finished." The final judgment had begun. Every hidden deed, every secret choice, was now revealed for all to see. Those who had followed the deceiver now faced the truth they had denied. Some fell to their knees, begging for another chance, but the time for choosing had passed. Robbie wanted to stay, to witness what would come next, but he felt himself being pulled away. The vision faded, and with a gasp, he woke up in his hospital bed, the weight of everything he had seen pressing down on him. As Robbie's vision continued, he saw a dividing line appear across the battlefield. It was not drawn by human hands but formed by an unseen force that separated the two sides. The faithful stood on one side, their light shining even brighter, while those who had followed the deceiver were left in darkness. This was not just a physical division but a spiritual one. Robbie saw people being pulled to one side or the other, often in ways they didn't expect. Some who had once stood firm in their faith found themselves drawn toward the shadows, their doubts and compromises finally catching up with them. Others, who had been unsure or even resistant to the truth, suddenly found themselves illuminated by a force beyond their understanding. It was as if every hidden intention, every silent choice, had been laid bare. The deceiver stood in the darkness, watching with narrowed eyes. He had spent lifetimes weaving a web of lies, convincing people that truth was subjective, that morality was fluid, that faith was unnecessary. But now, all of his efforts were unraveling. The division was clear. There were no more gray areas, no room for indecision. Every soul had to make a choice, light or darkness, truth or deception, Christ or the deceiver. Then, Robbie saw something that shook him to his core. The people on the side of darkness were not just strangers. They were leaders, public figures, even religious teachers who had once spoken of righteousness. They had preached virtue but had lived in secret corruption. Now, their true allegiance was exposed. Some tried to cross over to the side of light, but the time for choosing had passed. The great separation was final. As soon as the separation was complete, the battle erupted. The forces of darkness lunged forward, their movements unnatural, almost demonic. But the faithful did not flinch. They did not carry weapons in the traditional sense, yet they wielded something far more powerful, words of truth, faith unshaken, and a force that Robbie could only describe as divine fire. The deceiver roared, unleashing every tool of deception at his disposal. He whispered doubts into the minds of those standing against him, trying to shake their resolve. He twisted memories, making people question whether they had chosen the right side. But the faithful did not listen. They stood firm, their eyes fixed on something beyond the battlefield. They were not fighting for survival, they were fighting for the victory that had already been promised. Then, the earth itself responded to the battle. Mountains crumbled, the oceans roared, and the sky split open with flashes of divine power. Robbie saw cities collapsing under the weight of their own corruption, as if the very foundations of the world could no longer support the deception that had been built upon them. It was a battle unlike any in history, not one of armies clashing but of truth dismantling lies, of light consuming darkness. As the battle raged on, Robbie saw people on the side of darkness begin to realize the truth. Some dropped to their knees, crying out for mercy, but it was too late. The deceiver had no loyalty to those who had followed him. As soon as they became weak, he discarded them, leaving them to their own destruction. It was then that Robbie understood the true nature of evil. It does not empower, it only consumes. For the first time, the deceiver faltered. His arrogance had been absolute, his confidence unshaken. But now he saw his empire of deception crumbling before his eyes. The lies he had carefully crafted were being exposed, and with each revelation, his power weakened. Then, a great light descended from above. It was not just light, it was the presence of the Almighty Himself. The faithful fell to their knees in reverence, while the forces of darkness recoiled, unable to withstand the brilliance. The deceiver turned, as if searching for a way to escape, but there was nowhere left to run. His time was up. Robbie saw the deceiver lash out in desperation, throwing every remaining illusion into the world. But it was useless. Truth had already been revealed. One by one, his strongholds fell. The false leaders, the corrupt systems, the deception that had held the world captive for so long. It all collapsed like a house of cards. Then, the final moment came. A voice echoed across the battlefield, powerful and absolute. It is finished. The deceiver let out a final, earth-shaking scream before he was cast into the abyss. The battle was over. Light had prevailed. The faithful stood victorious, not by their own strength, but by the power of the one they had remained loyal to. Robbie felt himself being pulled away once more, the vision beginning to fade. He had seen the end of deception, the fall of the great deceiver, and the final victory of truth. But as he returned to his body, he knew one thing for certain. The real battle had already begun. Robbie's vision is a warning. A reminder that the battle between truth and deception is real and closer than we think. The final choice will not be made in some distant future, it is being made now, in the hearts of every person. If this message resonated with you, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more insights on prophecy, faith, and the unseen realities of our world. The time to prepare is now. Will you be ready?